Okay, so we are entering a new unit in this class, the last unit. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, this unit has the most readings. And I normally do that on purpose because I think the stuff that we're going to be talking about in these next few weeks as we finish up the semester are the things that, I don't know, people really think of when they hear the word philosophical. They think about these grand questions, these questions about life, death, the universe, and everything. And we're going to kick it off by looking at just one of the chapters of an essay that Helen Keller wrote while she was alive. American author, deaf, blind person who became deaf and blind due to an illness when she was just a very small child. Nevertheless, she was a remarkable woman, and until the age of 7, she learned to communicate using basically homemade signs. But she didn't let her disabilities stop her from exploring some of the fundamental questions that we've been exploring in this class and being a prolific author. I think she wrote something like 14 books and hundreds of essays. And I think the one that we're looking at today, perhaps, is just what we need in order to make it through the class if we're tired, or a message that, I don't know, might be comforting to hear, given that we're all suffering through our own problems, our own trials and tribulations. And so today I'd like to do something a little bit different. I'd like to just read through this essay with you. I'm not going to write really anything on the board today. I want this class to be a little bit more interactive. Reading through this, stopping periodically, and just talking with you and seeing what you are thinking and what kinds of thoughts and feelings are popping up for you in this piece. So I'm going to go ahead and start, and when I think we've come across something that is interesting or rich, I'll stop, and we can just chat about what Helen Keller is saying here and whether or not you agree with her. So let's begin. This is chapter 3. The test of all beliefs is their practical effect in life. If it be true that optimism compels the world forward and pessimism retards it, that is, slows it down, then it is dangerous to propagate a pessimistic philosophy. One who believes that the pain in the world outweighs the joy and expresses that unhappy conviction only adds to the pain. Schopenhauer is an enemy to the human race. Even if he earnestly believed that this is the most wretched of possible worlds, he should not promulgate a doctrine which robs men of the incentive to fight with circumstance. If life gave him ashes for bread, it was his fault. Life is a fair field, and the right will prosper if we stand by our guns. Okay, so she's saying a lot there. Let's just break it down perhaps sentence by sentence. Just to give you a little bit of background, Arthur Schopenhauer was perhaps one of the most pessimistic philosophers to have ever lived. He regarded life as a mistake and thought that if you wanted to conquer your will, and this is a meaningful thing worth doing, you should just starve yourself and die. What do we think about that view? Is that the kind of view that you have about life? Are you pessimistic? Should we starve ourselves and die? Because there's just enough pain and suffering. This whole thing is an accident or a mistake. What do you think? Maybe in your darker moments. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, I think like that whole idea of like, I think, was it Camus that like talked about like, do you have like your cup of coffee in the morning, or do you kill yourself kind of thing? Like, is that what that was?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I can recall, Camus was an absurdist.
Yeah.
And I would say his philosophy is more optimistic than Schopenhauer's, right? Despite the absurdities of life, I don't know, we should rail against the condition, right? Do not go gently into that good night, I think is a phrase that he would have liked.
I think, like, kind of what I got from his readings was, like, there's, like, no meaning in death. And so, like, sure, like, dying would, like, end suffering and despair, but, like, there's no meaning in that. Like, there's more meaning in living because, like, dying would just cut off any possibility of anything, so.
Okay, so what do you think about what she's saying here? Putting forth and arguing for a pessimistic philosophy is dangerous. It adds to the pain. We shouldn't promulgate doctrines like that. Do you agree with that?
I agree. I think, pessimism can sort of cut off meaning. I mean, that's like the whole, like, nihilist, like, nothing matters, there's no meaning. And it's like, there is meaning, you just have to create it.
Okay. Okay, what do the rest of y'all think? Yeah?
I mean, I think when you, like, feed into, like, I think everyone's gonna have, like, pessimistic thoughts, but when you really, like, feed into that, I think it's easy to fall into things like what Schopenhauer said, where, like, that will seem like the only logical thing at some point, but it's not, like, but if you feed into that and, like, only think about that over and over again, that's eventually what it's gonna lead to.
Okay, so you kind of agree with the spirit of what she's saying here.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. Okay, well, let's continue. Let's see what else she says here. Let pessimism once take hold of the mind, and life is all topsy-turvy, all vanity and vexation of spirit. There is no cure for individual or social disorder, except in forgetfulness and annihilation. Let us eat, drink, and be merry, says the pessimist, for tomorrow we die. If I regarded my life from the point of view of the pessimist, I should be undone. I should seek in vain for the light that does not visit my eyes and the music that does not ring in my ears. I should beg night and day and never be satisfied. I should sit apart in awful solitude, a prey to fear and despair. But since I consider it a duty to myself and to others to be happy, I escape a misery worse than any physical deprivation. So you can see here the kinds of effects that embodying and advocating a pessimistic philosophy leads to, at least according to her, right? All of life becomes topsy-turvy, vanity and vexation of spirit. There is no fixing things, right? If you have this pessimistic outlook, there is no fixing things, except perhaps if you forget about all the problems and sorrows, or you kill yourself, or we let the human race die out, right? And so she connects this to her personal experience. If I regarded my life from the point of view of the pessimist, I should be undone. I mean, think about how difficult it would be for you if you were both deaf and blind. How would you view life? Would you be angry? Would you want to give up? Would you give up? I mean, can we even empathize with that experience? Maybe sympathize. And so we can see that she's developing this argument that if you embody this pessimistic view of your circumstances, of life, of whether or not it all means anything, whether or not there's any meaning or purpose, that it just makes things worse for you and others. What do we think about that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to fall into like a nihilistic and pessimistic mind state, but it really accomplishes nothing. And unless you kill yourself, you're kind of just prolonging like useless suffering.
Okay.
So I mean, you might as well try to embody like an optimistic mindset because you're here for the time being, and it's probably better to live an optimistic mind, like, I don't know, lifestyle versus a pessimistic, and woe is me dragging everybody down all the time.
Okay. Do y'all think there's like an intrinsic value to life? Do you think life would be worth living even if you had the crappiest life imaginable, or no? There's some philosophers who have this intuition that, like, look, even if your life really sucks, it's still better that you're alive than to have never existed. What do y'all think about that?
I mean, I feel like you kind of have to think that, because like even if it's like not good for you and like you're never happy or like whatever, like maybe that will help teach somebody else and like help them. That's
Okay.
what I try to think of. But I think it reminds me of like why it's scary to like have so much social media to like young people, because like people will romanticize like such a pessimistic, negative view, and I think part of life is like trying to figure out, because it's not easy to like be optimistic, and when people are just like, especially young people, are fed that already at like a shitty time in their life, like that's part of why everything like goes downhill, like the more advanced we get into it.
Okay.
If that makes sense. I don't know if it does.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Does anybody else have anything to add? Yeah.
I mean, like, I don't know if there, I don't think we can know if there is like an actual like value to life, but it's
Like objectively.
yeah, it's like, I mean, we'd like to tell ourselves that it's probably like a coping mechanism to try to piece meaning to it or whatever, but I mean, there's also, like, we also don't know if there is, like, isn't, and what was I gonna say? I don't know, I'll come back to my second point.
Yeah, you could think, like, look, I'm not here for a reason. There's no objective meaning or purpose to this life or my existence. Alternatively, if you thought that there was no objective meaning, you could go in one of two directions. You could think, okay, so life sucks then, and I might as well die. Might as well kill myself because it's all pain and suffering. There's not a reason why I'm here. It's all accidental. I'm pushed and pulled by the whims of fate. Or you could recognize your condition and you could think, well, if there's no objective meaning or purpose, that means I get to create my own. Wow, isn't that cool? And so you could find meaning another way. Even if your existence wasn't planned, even if you weren't created for a purpose. So even if there isn't an objective meaning, that doesn't necessarily mean you gotta be a pessimistic person, right? You have a choice in front of you. Yeah. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say like very similar, just like how I think, with like absurdism, like I feel like there's kind of a pipeline from like nihilism to absurdism, because it's like once you sort of accept that there is no like determined like meaning of life, and there's no like determined trajectory of life, and in a lot of ways you don't have control of what's gonna happen. There's sort of like this like dread of like there is no meaning, and kind of can get like depressing, and you kind of go into like a void of like pessimism. But I think if you can accept that, like you're saying, like accept that sort of like absurdism of life, where like there is freedom in that lack of like determinism, like there is like things that you can do there.
An opportunity, you might say?
Yeah, and I think sort of like Russell Brand, like I think a lot of that opportunity is just like based on how you view things to be. Like if you're gonna view things to be pessimistically, then that's the life you're gonna live in. But if you wanna, like live in a life where you're happy, then you have to like believe that you're living a happy life.
Ah, that's interesting. Okay. So what your comment just reminded me of is one of the central tenets of Buddhism, which we haven't gotten to yet. But if my memory serves correctly, it's the first line of the Dhammapada, which says, "The mind is the forerunner to all things." And what the Buddhists are trying to get at with that is so much of how we experience reality in this life is strongly influenced by our perspective, by our mind, by our outlook, all of that mental stuff. And in some sense, they would say our mind kind of constructs the reality in which we live. Not fully, but, in a way that is important and significant. We might say that Helen Keller is implying something similarly here, which you were kind of implying with your comment. Yeah. And so what does she go on to say? Who shall dare let his incapacity for hope or goodness cast a shadow upon the courage of those who bear their burdens as if they were privileges? The optimist cannot fall back, cannot falter, for he knows his neighbor will be hindered by his failure to keep in line. He will therefore hold his place fearlessly and remember the duty of silence. Sufficient unto each heart is its own sorrow. He will take the iron claws of circumstance in his hand and use them as tools to break away the obstacles that block his path. He will work as if upon him alone depended the establishment of heaven and earth. We have seen that the world's philosophers, the sayers of the word, were optimists. So also are the men of action and achievement, the doers of the world. Dr. Howe found his way to Laura Bridgman's soul because he began with the belief that he could reach it. English jurists had said that the deaf-blind were idiots in the eyes of the law. Behold what the optimist does. He controverts a hard legal axiom. He looks behind the dull, impassive clay and sees a human soul in bondage, and quietly, resolutely sets about its deliverance. His efforts are victorious. He creates intelligence out of idiocy and proves to the law that the deaf-blind man is a responsible being. So she obviously has some very optimistic views about the things that we are capable of in our lives, right? Not only is she attempting to evoke here her own personal experience and what she's done in her life, but due to the outlook that she has, she's looking around at the world and other people. And what she's saying here is, like, look, even if your life sucks, it doesn't mean like you're going to be stuck like that. You have the power and the ability to change things, to do things, to affect great change in your personal life and in society. Do y'all believe that as well? Do you think you have the ability to change things in your personal life and in society, or no? Or are y'all a little bit pessimistic and hopeless? Yeah.
I think it's like human nature to be like a little bit pessimistic and hopeless. But like I think being optimistic and being happy, like what she's saying is kinda right, because like that takes work. And that's not just like an easy thing to do, and that's not just gonna come by itself. And I think that's like part of like what she was saying with like the meaning, like you need to find meaning. Like even if you don't think you have it, like that's part of like the only like one of the foolproof things, because if you can't fully rely on religion or things like that, because like you'll never know, but like you at least know that like you're here, and like while you're here, like it's part of your like responsibility to try to make meaning out of your life.
Okay. So you have like a duty to yourself in that way, maybe?
Yeah, kinda. Yeah.
What do the rest of y'all think about that? Do you think you have some kind of duty or obligation to yourself to make yourself happy, or create a purpose, or find meaning, or no?
I agree with that. I think sometimes like I think about like people pleasing and like how like as I've grown up I've realized like how much that can kind of like throw away your life, because it's like you're only living for your like you are your own life. Like it's not that you're only living for yourself, you can live for other people too, but if you aren't living for yourself, like, and you're only living for other people, I feel like you're gonna find that you've sort of like spent your entire life like living for other people. And, like, I feel like that can be dangerous because that's like, are you really gonna find meaning, like your own meaning and your own like contentment with life if you're only living to please other people?
And if we can harken back to what Fromm was saying in the last class, doing so isn't going to be fulfilling for you, right? He would say, just conforming to others' expectations or standards is going to suffocate you in some sense. I think she's even making a stronger claim, though, here. I think what we can draw from this paragraph is her claim that, well, she makes a number of claims here, but the optimist is someone who has some kind of duty to provide an example to others that might help draw them out of the darkness of anguish and misery. Do you try to live your lives like an example to others? Or are you not really concerned about that at all?
I mean, I think it helps. Like, I don't know, for me at least, like, I have, like, a bunch of nephews and nieces, and, like, I don't want them to have to, like, deal with things like I had to.
Okay.
And when you have, like, people like that in your life, like, it's gonna help you make better decisions, and you'll be less, like, self-deprecating and, like, do less damage to yourself in that process, because you don't want that in people you look up to.
Yeah, maybe it'll involve you caring for yourself more. Maybe it will also help you make things better for the future, right? Not only for yourself, but for future generations. Yeah. Okay. Let's continue on. When Hui offered to teach the blind to read, he was met by pessimism that laughed at his folly. Had he not believed that the soul of man is mightier than the ignorance that fetters it, had he not been an optimist, he would not have turned the fingers of the blind into new instruments. No pessimist ever discovered the secrets of the stars, or sailed to an uncharted land, or opened a new heaven to the human spirit. St. Bernard was so deeply an optimist that he believed 250 enlightened men could illuminate the darkness which overwhelmed the period of the Crusades. And the light of his faith broke like a new day upon Western Europe. John Bosco, the benefactor of the poor and the friendless of Italian cities, was another optimist, another prophet who, perceiving a divine idea while it was yet afar, proclaimed it to his countrymen. Although they laughed at his vision and called him a madman, yet he worked on patiently, and with the labor of his hands he maintained a home for little street waifs. In the fervor of enthusiasm, he predicted the wonderful movement which should result from his work. Even in the days before he had money or patronage, he drew glowing pictures of the splendid system of schools and hospitals which should spread from one end of Italy to the other. And he lived to see the organization of the San Salvador Society, which was the embodiment of his prophetic optimism. When Dr. Seguin declared his opinion that the feeble-minded could be taught, again people laughed, and in their complacent wisdom said he was no better than an idiot himself. But the noble optimist persevered, and by the reluctant pessimists saw that he whom they ridiculed had become one of the world's philanthropists. Thus the optimist believes, attempts, achieves. He stands always in the sunlight. Someday the wonderful, the inexpressible arrives and shines upon him, and he is there to welcome it. His soul meets his own and beats a glad march to every new discovery, every fresh victory over difficulties, every addition to human knowledge and happiness. So what have you encountered in your lives? What will you encounter if you try to live life as an example, or if you're going to be an optimist? Well, you're going to encounter some pushback, right? You're going to see people calling you stupid, or misguided, or idiotic. Yet, Helen Keller is saying what is important about staving off that pessimistic attitude and outlook is that if you embody it, it's not going to allow you to really achieve anything or discover anything. Why? Well, because you're not going to have the motivation to do anything. You're going to look around and see problems. You're not going to want to overcome any difficulties or hurdles that come your way. You will suffer them and then probably complain about it, right? Talk about how bad life is. And so in some sense, what she's saying is human progress requires having a certain optimistic attitude towards the world and what is out there. If you don't remain open to experiencing that stuff or open to exploration, I mean, what are you really going to do? Are you going to get anything done? Are you going to make things happen? Or are you just going to make things worse? This is something that we could all meditate on. We have found that our great philosophers and our great men of action are optimists. So too, our most potent men of letters have been optimists in their books and in their lives. No pessimist ever won an audience commensurately wide with his genius. And many optimistic writers have been read and admired out of all measure to their talents, simply because they wrote of the sunlit side of life. Dickens, Lamb, Goldsmith, Irving, all the well-beloved and gentle humorists were optimists. Swift, the pessimist, has never had as many readers as his towering genius should command. And indeed, when he comes down into our century and meets Thackeray, that generous optimist can hardly do him justice. In spite of the latter-day notoriety of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, we may set it down as a rule that he who would be heard must be a believer, must have a fundamental optimism in his philosophy. He may bluster and disagree and lament as Carlyle and Ruskin do sometimes, but a basic confidence in the good destiny of life and of the world must underlie his work. Again, we see this idea that in some sense, happiness and success requires having some sort of attitude or disposition that doesn't just look at things and call it bad and not want to engage with it. She brings up a bunch of examples here of writers who she thinks are optimists and consequently who have found success in their work. Why? Well, because they actually wanted to talk about stuff. They had some sort of inner fire or inner spirit to explore the things of life. If you adopt a pessimistic attitude, how spirited are you? Or is your spirit dead? Do y'all know any pessimists? What are they like? Do they seem passionate and spirited to you? Do they seem happy? There are a bunch of reasons why we might lapse into a kind of a pessimistic view, right? Life is hard. We have to do things we don't want to do. We have to suffer things that are unfair. But I suppose what Helen Keller is inviting us to ask is, if it's fight back and explore and try to make things better, and the alternative is sit in misery, what alternative is that? Doesn't seem to be an alternative that is worthy of the authentic human life. Because apparently, according to her, all great people have been optimistic in some degree. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to do what they have done. I don't know if you all agree with that, but it's worth meditating on.
I was gonna about pessimists. I've noticed
Yeah.
a lot of pessimists tend to blame their unhappiness on external factors and sort
Okay.
of the world, and I think there is a lot to be blamed on external factors for sure.
Sure.
But I think that sort of locus of control where you're gonna understand you do have control of your actions and your behaviors and your thought processes and so I feel that sort of pessimism kind of comes from a lack of that locus of control where you're feel in control of something. I mean, it's better to
Mhm.
feel an over sense of control over your life than to feel out of control. Even if you're wrong and even if you're not as in control as you think you are, it's better to have that almost maybe self-serving bias where you're
Well, so let's say you think you can't control anything. Society is going to make you do things. The system's responsible for your fate and what you are like now. You don't really have the power or the ability to change things. If you embodied that view, if you believed that, if you followed that, what kind of life would that be? What would that experience be like?
I think it will, even from just what I've watched people do in my personal life, I think it ends up manifesting itself physically. I know someone who's like that and super pessimistic and they've been sick for a while, but every day they wake up and just think about how sick they are, and I feel it's not gonna aid anything other than just making them sicker. And
Okay.
how stress and everything ties into that, and if you wake up every day believing that you're gonna feel like shit, then you're gonna feel like shit, and then you're just not gonna go out and go to the store and what you're gonna lay in bed all day, and then that just continues to snowball.
So it might prevent you from doing the things that might help you?
Yeah, and then because you're not doing anything that will help you, it just kind of goes in a cycle.
Yeah.
And it'll eventually just kill you, because whether it's yourself or it's your health problems or anything, I just don't think it's good.
Okay. Not a winning strategy
Not
for someone.
I don't think you can improve very much off of that.
Okay. Yeah.
I think for pessimism to change in individuals, it has to be more about their viewpoint of life, because you don't hear a lot of pessimists saying they're pessimists. A lot of times they'll say they're a realist. So they think that how they look at the world is the realistic way to look at the world.
Right.
Which is usually negative, and that the world's awful, and that it treats people awful, and that there's no way to get yourself out of the hole or whatever. And I think that's more of a viewpoint on the world, and how to change that viewpoint of what to see the good in the world instead of just seeing the world as inherently bad, but not necessarily because I think that is often tied with what she said with sickness and people laying in bed, whatever, because that's our most common one is the rotting in bed kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, that's become a thing.
And
Yeah.
connected with a lot of depression, because I don't think necessarily pessimism is I don't think you're a bad person if you're a pessimist, but I think it ends up being a thing that you're labeled as when you have a viewpoint that's negative, and oftentimes people with mental health issues become pessimistic because they've experienced the world as only negative.
Okay. And I don't know, do people like being around pessimists?
I think if you yourself are a pessimist.
Okay, say more about that.
I mean, I think like how she was talking about like people tend to romanticize like pessimism. I think like I know like in my like high school years, like early high school years when I was depressed, like I realized like all my friends are depressed too, and then I'm like, I don't know, like chicken or the egg, you know? It's like I think you kind of like attract that into your life, and then also you sort of like crave that because it's like if you have this like pessimistic view, and then you're around people that are like all happy and you know, are like no, life is great, and you're like, what are you talking about? Like I'm miserable. Like I think it's sort of like it's that comfort of like life is miserable and someone be like, yeah, no, it is miserable, like let's just like sit here and suffer together. It's like I feel like that tends to happen.
So it can kind of lead to like a cycle.
Yeah.
I heard this story one time, which I think fits in with your point. Somebody I knew was asked, because they were depressed, and they had been depressed for a very long time, why aren't you trying to get help? You know, why aren't you going to therapy? Why aren't you seeking out counseling or trying to change things in your life? And do you know what they said? What makes you think I'm not happy being depressed? I think that's something that some people fall into, right? Once you get used to a kind of perspective, and that perspective becomes safe and predictable and comforting, even if it's one that, you know, might not be good for you, it's one that you may crave. And that's something worth reflecting on as well. And so she says, Shakespeare is the prince of optimists. His tragedies are a revelation of moral order. In Lear and Hamlet, there is a looking forward to something better. Someone is left at the end of the play to right wrong, restore society, and build the state anew. The later plays, The Tempest and Cymbeline, show a beautiful, placid optimism which delights in reconciliations and reunions, and which plans for the triumph of external as well as internal good. If Browning were less difficult to read, he would surely be the dominant poet in this century. I feel the ecstasy with which he exclaims, "Oh, good gigantic smile of the brown old earth this autumn morning." And how he sets my brain going when he says, because there is imperfection, there must be perfection. Completeness must come of incompleteness. Failure is an evidence of triumph for the fullness of the days. Yes, discord is, that harmony may be. Pain destroys, that health may renew. Perhaps I am deaf and blind, that others likewise afflicted may see and hear with a more perfect sense. From Browning I learned that there is no lost good. And that makes it easier for me to go at life, right or wrong, do the best I know, and fear not. My heart responds proudly to his exhortation to pay gladly life's debt of pain, darkness, and cold. Lift up your burden. It is God's gift. Bear it nobly. The man of letters, whose voice is to prevail, must be an optimist, and his voice often learns its message from his life. Stevenson's life has become a tradition only 10 years after his death. He has taken his place among the heroes, the bravest man of letters since Johnson and Lamb. I remember an hour when I was discouraged and ready to falter. For days I had been pegging away at a task which refused to get itself accomplished. In the midst of my perplexity, I read an essay of Stevenson which made me feel as if I had been outing in the sunshine, instead of losing heart over a difficult task. I tried again with new courage and succeeded almost before I knew it. I have failed many times since, but I have never felt so disheartened as I did before that sturdy preacher gave me a lesson in the fashion of the smiling face. And thus we'll end after this paragraph here and just chat. Read Schopenhauer and Omar, and you will grow to find the world as hollow as they find it. Read Green's History of England, and the world is peopled with heroes. I never knew why Greene's history thrilled me with the vigor of romance until I read his biography. Then I learned how his quick imagination transfigured the hard, bare facts of life into new and living dreams. When he and his wife were too poor to have a fire, he would sit before the unlit hearth and pretend that it was ablaze. "Drill your thoughts," he said. "Shut out the gloomy and call in the bright. There is more wisdom in shutting one's eyes than your copybook philosophers will allow." And so again, she's bringing up this idea, right, of how our outlook, our perspective, the kind of mental state that we're in is going to have a huge impact on how we see and interpret the world. If you're pessimistic, you're going to interpret things pessimistically. You're going to focus on the negative, focus on the bad. But perhaps if you have some sense of optimism within you, you'll be able to recognize the good things that you have and be grateful. You'll be able to have hope and look forward to opportunity, despite failure and setback. But what I'd like to ask you all about is this phrase right here. Lift up your burden. It is God's gift. Bear it nobly. This is a really interesting idea. The idea that the lot that we are living in our lives is a gift. What do you all think about that? Does that strike you as correct? Incorrect? Is she just being sickeningly optimistic here? Some people have shitty lives, right? Yeah.
I mean, I've heard the expression a lot, like it's better to feel like heartbreak than to feel like nothing, and a lot that goes along with that. And I feel like that just kind of ties into that. And I don't know.
It's hard to do this, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to complain, it's easy to get sad. Just this morning I was pissed off because somebody cut me off on the road. And I let out a string of obscenities in my car. And then I kind of laughed to myself because I was like, why are you getting so angry? It's Wednesday. Wednesday's cool. And I don't have to work tomorrow. So that's good. Yeah.
I think kind of like what she was referencing about like how like the autumn leaves and like oh wait, what great smile, whatever, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of like referencing like how if there's bad there can be good, because like you can't have good without bad. And I feel like life is like there is like a balance to life. Like I feel like life in general is just bittersweet. Like I feel like there's always like something good that is gonna happen. There's always something bad that's gonna happen. Like I feel like life is just bittersweet. But I think like that balance can like differ on people. Like I feel like if you look at people that seemingly have it all and they don't seem to be like very happy people, I feel like it's because they don't have enough like balance of like the bad with the good, because like the good can't be as good if they don't have that equal as bad. And I feel like people that have a lot of suffering, they can experience like greater amounts of joy, because it's like once that balance is like sort of, you know, they're like here, it's like there's more of a journey, there's more like I think it gets heightened.
It's awesome that you said that, because I was just going to bring up that same view. Nietzsche once said that joy and sorrow are like twins. They grow and diminish together. And what he meant by that was the extent to which you can experience joy and happiness is proportional to the degree of the suffering that you have experienced. To know true joy, you must know true suffering. And so somebody who has gone through a very cushy life, who's never had any obstacles or hurdles, if they haven't suffered, they can't experience true joy. They can experience some amount of it, some amount of happiness, but there's something that they're missing. And so in a very real sense, this is an idea that philosophers in both the Western and Eastern traditions have brought up, which is there seems to be like a polarity with regards to our universe. Good and bad cannot exist without each other. High and low cannot exist without each other. Perfect and imperfect, hot and cold, what these things mean, how these things work, is that they're necessarily tied to one another in a certain sense. And we'll discuss this more when we get to Taoism, for example. But yeah, great point. Let's continue on here. Every optimist, Keller says, moves along with progress and hastens it, while every pessimist would keep the world at a standstill. The consequence of pessimism in the life of a nation is the same as in the life of the individual. Pessimism kills the instinct that urges men to struggle against poverty, ignorance, and crime, and dries up all the fountains of joy in the world. In imagination, I leave the country which lifts up the manhood of the poor, and I visit India, the underworld of fatalism, where 300 million human beings, scarcely men, submerged in ignorance and misery, precipitate themselves still deeper into the pit. Why are they thus? Because they have, for thousands of years, been the victims of their philosophy, which teaches them that men are as grass, and the grass fadeth. And there is no more greenness upon the earth. They sit in the shadow and let the circumstances they should master grip them until they cease to be men and are made to dance and salaam like puppets in a play. After a little hour, death comes and hurries them off to the grave, and other puppets with other pasteboard passions and desires take their place, and the show goes on for centuries. So another reason why she thinks we shouldn't be pessimists is because if we're pessimists, things are not going to change. Things are going to stay the same. We're not going to have the desire or the motivation to actually fight, you know? What do you think about that? Has that been your experience? If you've ever suffered from depression or if you're suffering from it now. What has that been like? Any motivation to do anything? Any motivation to change things? Any energy to do the things that would help you, such as getting vitamin D, going out and standing in the sun for a while, or actually eating something besides, you sure? Just throwing the candy wrappers and, milk drinks off the side of your bed. I think what she's trying to get at is there's a kind of deadening that goes along with pessimism. And maybe there's something true about how the pessimist views the world. The world surely is full of pain and suffering, right? And it's unfair, and bad things happen. But I think what she's encouraging us to do is act despite that. And to think well of others despite that. Because we can recognize those facts of life without letting them weigh us down and prevent us from doing anything. So she says, pessimism kills the instinct that urges men to struggle against poverty, ignorance, and crime, and dries up all the fountains of joy in the world. Do you think she's over-exaggerating here? Or is she on to something? Yeah?
I say she's not being dramatic because I feel like if you live in suffering instead of going against it, if you don't try to go against it, you're just gonna constantly feel like there's nothing there. There's no point of trying to fill that void with something else.
Okay, so you think she's right. Okay, what do the rest of y'all think? You're like, I don't know, I'm tired. I'm tired too. But this is our call to be optimists and to be spirited today. Rah. Just give me your personal thoughts here. Promise you're not going to say something stupid. It's fine. I will wait. Yeah.
I think optimists and pessimists both play important roles in the world because
Okay.
I mean, life isn't all joy, but I mean, life isn't all sadness either. And like, I don't know, for like technological advancement and stuff, and just advancement in general, you need pessimists who will view the negative aspects and like the negative outcomes of things in order to implement like safety measures and things.
Okay. So, yeah. Well, one thing you might worry about is like, look, if you imbibe the optimistic view too much, maybe that'll prevent you from thinking about what could go wrong or locating problems and issues, right? Yeah, I mean, think about it. Maybe there is a certain danger with being super duper optimistic all the time. Maybe that might blind you to things that you should be paying attention to. Okay, so maybe a balance needs to be achieved or something. Yeah?
I feel like if you always, like, I'm not saying you should always see the negative and stuff, but like, that's like you going somewhere and you expect something to be the way you thought it was going to be, and then you get your hopes up for nothing. I feel like you should always see the ugly and the beauty in things.
Okay. Yeah, again, not being totally pessimistic and totally optimistic and hopeful and expectant about everything. Although maybe we could also disentangle those two things, right? I think you can be hopeful without having all these expectations about what's going to happen, right? Maybe the expectations are bad, because then you get disappointed, right? And you're like, oh man, I wanted to go to this new place. The food here sucks. I thought it was going to be great. And you're like, now my day is ruined, because I built this up in my mind.
I mean, I had like a conversation with my mom actually about like just holding expectations on people and how I feel like because of that, because I worry about like people not like ultimately disappointing those expectations. I just like from like a younger age I started just like not holding any expectations to people, but then like I was talking to my mom about how like I realized like by doing that like I sort of let people just do what they want and like kind of treat me wrong because I'm not holding any expectations. And my mom's like, there's a certain level of like expectations that can go into fantasy where it's like if you hold too much expectations over people, it can kind of go into a fantasy of like something like you can't expect anyone to you can't expect anything from anyone, but you can hold standards to people, and I think that's kind of where it's different. I think that's where that hope and like expectations are. It's like there can be standards to life, there can be hope in life, but I don't think for like the sake of your own good that you should hold like expectations, because that is sort of like creating a story in your head of what you want. And like she said, like you can't create a story of like the future because like it's never going to go exactly how you want it to.
Yeah, when the story doesn't match up with what actually happens, that brings people suffering, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, so some kind of balance. Seems like what y'all are echoing here. She continues on with this example. Go to India and see what sort of civilization is developed when a nation lacks faith in progress and bows to the gods of darkness. Under the influence of Brahmanism, genius and ambition have been suppressed. There is no one to befriend the poor or to protect the fatherless and the widow. The sick lie untended. The blind know not how to see, nor the deaf to hear, and they are left by the roadside to die. In India, it is a sin to teach the blind and the deaf, because their affliction is regarded as a punishment for offenses in a previous state of existence. If I had been born in the midst of these fatalistic doctrines, I should still be in darkness. My life a desert land where no caravan of thought might pass between my spirit and the world beyond. This might be a little bit confusing if you don't know much about Indian philosophies. But, so there are a few different Eastern philosophical traditions that Indian people believe in. I think we're going to talk about Buddhism later in the class. But another one is Hinduism. And there's a lot that goes into it. But basically, like Buddhism, there is this idea of a cycle of reincarnation. And there's an idea of really what all of this stuff is Brahma, God, the Divine One, who has split itself, disassociated itself from itself into all of these different manifestations. And so I am God, and you are God, that is God. Kind of like a giant game of God playing hide and seek with itself. You might view that as actually a kind of liberatory philosophy, right? Recognizing the divinity within you, the capacities that you have. But you could also view it kind of as fatalistic. Do you have free will to really do anything? Really, there is no you as you understand it. There's something else there. And so I don't know how good her example is here, but if she's right, one of the other things she's also bringing up here is how, at least in India during this time, she seems to be implying there are not policies and institutions for helping people with disabilities, which obviously she would think is a bad thing, as somebody who is suffering from two herself, right? And so she says, the Hindus believe in endurance, but not in resistance. Therefore, they have been subdued by strangers. Their history is a repetition of that of Babylon. A nation from afar came with speed swiftly, and none stumbled or slept or slumbered, but they brought desolation upon the land, and took the stay and the staff from the people, the whole stay of bread, and the whole stay of water, the mighty man, the man of war, the judge, and the prophet, and the prudent and the ancient, and none delivered them. Woe indeed is the heritage of those who walk sad-thoughted and downcast through this radiant, soul-delighting earth, blind to its beauty and deaf to its music. And any of those who call evil good and good evil, and put darkness for light and light for darkness. What care the weather-bronzed sons of the West, feeding the world from the plains of Dakota for the Omars and the Brahmins? They would say to the Hindus, blot out your philosophy, dead for 1,000 years. Look with fresh eyes at reality and life. Put away your Brahmins and your crooked gods, and seek diligently for Vishnu the Preserver. Optimism is the faith that leads to achievement. Nothing can be done without hope. When our forefathers laid the foundation of the American Commonwealths, what nerved them to their task but a vision of a free community? Against the cold, inhospitable sky, across the wilderness white with snow, where lurked the hidden savage, who gleamed the bow of promise, toward which they set their faces with the faith that levels mountains, fills up valleys, bridges rivers, and carries civilization to the uttermost parts of the earth. Although the pioneers cannot build according to the Hebraic ideal they saw, yet invoking kind of Christianity here, right? And slavery. Yet they gave the pattern of all that is most enduring in our country today. They brought to the wilderness the thinking mind, the printed book, the deep-rooted desire for self-government, and the English common law that judges alike the king and the subject, the law on which rests the whole structure of our society. And so here again we're seeing this idea that progress and discovery and invention, it can't rest just on quiet complacence, right? There needs to be something else there that serves as a foundation or a motivation to engage in these activities. And she's saying that is hope. Optimism is the faith that leads to achievement. Nothing can be done without hope. What do you think about that? Do you feel very hopeful in your life? Or no? Maybe our definition of hope is a little bit different from hers. What does hope mean to you? What does it mean to have hope?
Just the thought that life will get better.
The thought that life will get better. Is it just a thought?
I guess the will that life will get better, because it's
Oh, the will. Okay.
more of like a, not just, oh, life could get better, but almost like a, I don't know, I feel like hope can be both active and inactive at the same time, where it's kind of like,
Okay.
you might not be doing anything to make life better, but it's almost like you're kind of trying to will it into existence that life will get better.
Okay.
As if you're saying that you know life will get better, not necessarily that you think it might, it might not, but hope feels more like direct that it will happen.
Like you're aimed towards, I don't know, whatever the opposite of like sad complacence is.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, because it feels more than just like a 50-50, oh, well, I'm, life might get better, but I don't think hope necessarily requires you to do anything to have hope, aside from literally just thinking it. But
Yeah,
I feel
yeah.
like it's more of like an active will for it to happen, even though it's all in your head kind of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like, whatever that is. Is it a thought? Is it an attitude? Is it a willing? Would you say you're hopeful in your life?
Yeah,
Yeah?
I think so.
She's saying that nothing can be done without it. What do you think about that?
I think that's pretty true. Like, I think that hope is the thought that something, even maybe I should retract what I previously said about life will get better, but maybe something will change, whether for better or for worse. But you can have hope for either.
Sure.
But I don't think you can do, because if you just think, if you're complacent, I think that's the opposite of hope, like complacence in life. And if you're complacent, then nothing's going to change with your will involved.
like things will change around you, obviously. So I think that unless you have hope, then yeah, nothing will change for you.
Okay. Yeah, this idea again of if you just accept things as they are and you have a hopeless attitude, yeah, what kind of motivation or incentive do you have to do anything? Right? There is a certain power that can come from radical acceptance of what is. Right? Just think about your own life experience. How many problems or traumas or issues or mental illnesses are you struggling with because you can't accept something about yourself or about how the world works? Or you can't face a truth, right? And you can't accept it. I'd venture to say all of us, probably, to some degree, right? And so, accepting what is, not turning your face away, not rejecting it, but being able to look at it and accept it, is one of the required steps for processing these emotions, right? And dealing with your issues. Looked at it in that light, there's a certain power and liberation that can come from radical acceptance. But on the flip side, a lot of bad can come from that as well. If you just radically accept everything and you're just like, well, this is the way the world is, I'm going to accept that, that might lead you to not change anything or work towards anything, right? That might lead you into a kind of fatalism in which you're like, well, this is just the way things are. I guess things are going to be shitty forever. So again, it seems like we have to achieve some sort of balance, right? A willingness to look at the things that we know will help us grow, but which are difficult to deal with. And a willingness to accept our lot in some sense. But not allow that acceptance to foster complacency or indifference or apathy. One of the things I've noticed teaching these last few years with regards to your generation is I see a lot of apathy and cynicism. And apathy might be a good shield against the sufferings of life. But I think Helen Keller would say living out this kind of apathy is, well, is it truly living? If you're not experiencing the ups and the downs, the joys and the sorrows, if you're just kind of indifferent to it all and checked out, is that truly living? Fromm would say no. That's a different thing. And so she brings up the founding of the United States as a prime example of what hope and optimism can do. And she continues, it is significant that the foundation of that law is optimistic. In Latin countries, the court proceeds with a pessimistic bias. The prisoner is held guilty until he is proved innocent. In England and the U.S., there is an optimistic presumption that the accused is innocent until it is no longer possible to deny his guilt. Under our system, it is said, many criminals are acquitted, but it is surely better so then that many innocent persons should suffer. Okay, well, yeah, what do you think about this legal standard? Innocent until proven guilty. Is that good? Or would it be better to flip it? No, you have to prove your innocence. We presume you're guilty. Yeah.
I'd say innocent until proven guilty.
Okay, why?
Because I think that kind of ties into like how democracy instead of like a representative republic is kind of like the rule of whoever's louder kind of wins. Where it's like I could just accuse you of something. with
Right,
No
yeah.
base, and then either tie you up in court or like I mean I don't know how those Latin countries operate with like if you're accused then you're also arrested until your trial.
Yeah, I don't
or
know.
Jailed into your trial, but like here since you're jailed into a trial and that could be months to years. Well, maybe not years, but it could be quite a few months
Yeah.
to a year.
Yeah.
That could destroy people's ability to do anything in terms of work or social lives, and also with like their tied in reputations to that, to be automatically guilty the second you're accused of something, especially in the United States, because I feel like with our culture, because we have innocent until proven guilty, it's kind of like if you're guilty and if the societal presumption is that you're guilty, which would be the automatic presumption here, then it ruins everything about your livelihood.
Sure, yeah. I don't want to discuss this in this class right now, but I'm going to give you something to think about. So talk about this with your friends and family members. We heard at least one of y'all say, yeah, it's good that we have this standard of innocent until proven guilty. Would the rest of y'all agree with that? Is that a good way to go about things in our legal system? Okay, so think about this then. Should we deal with rape accusations in the same way? Or no? That's a tough question, right? Anyway, think about that. I'm going to continue on here. The pessimist cries, "There is no enduring good in man. The tendency of all things is through perpetual loss to chaos in the end." If there ever was an idea of good in things, if there was ever an idea of good in things evil, it was impotent, and the world rushes on to ruin. But behold, the law of the two most sober-minded, practical and law-abiding nations on earth assumes the good in man and demands a proof of the bad. Optimism is the faith that leads to achievement. The prophets of the world have been of good heart, or their standards would have stood naked in the field without a defender. Tolstoy's strictures lose power because they are pessimistic. If he had seen clearly the faults of America and still believed in her capacity to overcome them, our people might have felt the stimulation of his censure. But the world turns its back on a hopeless prophet and listens to Emerson, who takes into account the best qualities of the nation and attacks only the vices which no one can defend or deny. It listens to the strong man, Lincoln, who in times of doubt, trouble, and need does not falter. He sees success afar, and by strenuous hope, by hoping against hope, inspires a nation. Through the night of despair, he says, "All is well," and thousands rest in his confidence. When such a man censures and points to a fault, the nation obeys, and his words sink into the ears of men. But to the lamentations of the habitual Jeremiah, the ear grows dull. Our newspapers should remember this. The press is the pulpit of the modern world, and on the preachers who fill it, much depends. If the protest of the press against unrighteous measures is to avail, then for 99 days the word of the preacher should be buoyant and of good cheer, so that on the 100th day the voice of censure may be 100 times strong. This was Lincoln's way. He knew the people. He believed in them and rested his faith on the justice and wisdom of the great majority. When in his rough and ready way he said, "You can't fool all the people all the time," he expressed a great principle, the doctrine of faith in human nature. And so she seems to be arguing here that we should have some sort of hope or faith in people. Do you all feel the same way? How do you look at others? Do you trust them? Do you have faith in them? Do you think they're going to do the right thing or not? Yeah.
Depends where I'm at. Town, I think so. I think people kind of look out for each other there, but I think Pittsburgh almost made me a little pessimistic because I've seen people just, walk past people who are hurt or not really care about the homeless or things like that. So
Sure.
I think it really depends on where you are and what society you're in it, or community, I mean.
Generally speaking, would you say you have faith in the goodness of human beings?
Yeah.
Okay. And so maybe that leads you to think like, look, maybe we could actually change things and better things. Maybe people aren't completely shit. Yeah? Okay, what do the rest of y'all think? Should we have faith in human beings? Or is that stupid? You agree? Okay, why?
I feel like as humans, we should see each other for who we are or for who they are until they prove it to us. Unless they prove it to us, otherwise.
Okay. So we should start by thinking the best of them, maybe. Okay, and that's a healthy way to live? For a start, yeah. I mean, sometimes you get burned, right? Because people suck, but...
I think also part of it is a lot of times people hurt others without necessarily trying to.
Sure.
It's just what happens, and I think it's obviously very safe to put a guard up, but just because somebody does something bad, maybe it wasn't directed towards you, or they're trying to improve their own life, and it just came down to it. So I think people mean the best. It doesn't always necessarily mean that they're gonna show that, or to you at least in your perspective.
Sure, yeah. I mean, if you ever work as a teacher, or if you work a job in which you have to deal with people, you'll have negative experiences with people a lot, right? And it's easy to think, oh, that person's just an asshole, right? Oh, people just suck. It's kind of like the easy position to adopt, right? But you never know what somebody is going through unless you talk to them, right? I'll never forget. I used to be a very impatient driver. I still am to some degree. And I would see these people driving slowly on the road, right? And I'd be like, what the fuck are you doing? Get over, get out of the left lane, you dumbass. You're driving slow. Move. And then, one time I had car troubles. And I couldn't go over 50 without a danger of my wheel flying off. And I thought, oh my goodness, what if every slow person I've ever encountered in my life has been having car problems? How would I know? Certainly a possibility, right? And that helped me be a lot more generous with the other drivers on the road, even though I think the majority of them are pretty bad. Now I don't feel so angry at them because I don't know what they're going through. So maybe it would be good to think and act charitably. You will get burned, yes, and people will hurt you. But you might also, through that, be able to form strong, meaningful relationships and learn things. So, I don't know. Weigh the pros and the cons of thinking everybody's a dick or having some faith in them. See what comes out. The prophet, she says, is not without honor, save he be a pessimist. The ecstatic prophecies of Isaiah did far more to restore the exiles of Israel to their homes than the lamentations of Jeremiah did to deliver them from the hands of evildoers. A biblical reference. Even on Christmas Day, do men remember that Christ came as a prophet of good? His joyous optimism is like water to feverish lips, and has for its highest expression the 8 Beatitudes. It is because Christ is an optimist that for ages he has dominated the Western world. For 19 centuries, Christendom has gazed into his shining face and felt that all things work together for good. St. Paul, too, taught the faith which looks beyond the hardest things into the infinite horizon of heaven, where all limitations are lost in the light of perfect understanding. If you are born blind, search the treasures of darkness. They are more precious than the gold of Ophir. They are love and goodness and truth and hope, and their price is above rubies and sapphires. Jesus utters and Paul proclaims a message of peace and a message of reason, a belief in the idea, not in things, in love, not in conquest. The optimist is he who sees that men's actions are directed not by squadrons and armies, but by moral power. That the conquests of Alexander and Napoleon are less abiding than Newton's and Galileo's, and St. Augustine's silent mastery of the world. Ideas are mightier than fire and sword. Noiselessly they propagate themselves from land to land, and mankind goes out and reaps the rich harvest and thanks God. But the achievements of the warrior are like his canvas city. Today a camp, tomorrow all struck and vanished, a few pit holes and heaps of straw. This was the gospel of Jesus 2,000 years ago. Christmas Day is the festival of optimism. Although there are still great evils which have not been subdued, and the optimist is not blind to them, yet he is full of hope. Despondency has no place in his creed, for he believes in the imperishable righteousness of God and the dignity of man. History records man's triumphant ascent. Each halt in his progress has been but a pause before a mighty leap forward. The time is not out of joint. If indeed some of the temples we worshipped in have fallen, we have built new ones on the sacred sites, loftier and holier than those which have crumbled. If we have lost some of the heroic physical qualities of our ancestors, we have replaced them with a spiritual nobleness that turns aside wrath and binds up the wounds of the vanquished. All the past attainments of man are ours, and more, his daydreams have become our clear realities. Therein lies our hope and sure faith. As I stand in the sunshine of a sincere and earnest optimism, my imagination paints yet more glorious triumphs on the cloud curtain of the future. Out of the fierce struggle and turmoil of contending systems and powers, I see a brighter spiritual era slowly emerge. An era in which there shall be no England, no France, no Germany, no America, no this people or that, but one family, the human race, one law, peace, one need, harmony, one means, labor, one taskmaster, God. If I should try to say anew the creed of the optimist, I should say something like this. I believe in God, I believe in man, I believe in the power of the Spirit. I believe it is a sacred duty to encourage ourselves and others, to hold the tongue from any unhappy word against God's world, because no man has any right to complain of a universe which God made good, and which thousands of men have striven to keep good. I believe we should so act that we may draw nearer and more near the age when no man shall live at his ease while another suffers. These are the articles of my faith, and there is yet another on which all depends. To bear this faith above every tempest which overfloods it, and to make it a principle in disaster and through affliction. Optimism is the harmony between man's spirit and the Spirit of God pronouncing his works good. And so it would appear as if Helen Keller has for her foundation a kind of spiritualism that motivates this optimism, right? Faith in something transcendent to human reality that is perfect and good and glorious. Nevertheless, I think she would agree that optimism can be bolstered even if you don't believe in God right now, even if you don't follow Christianity. She would encourage you to do so because it would be better for you and better for the world. So, any closing thoughts, ideas, concerns? Did you like this essay? Did it fill you with joy? You like it? Okay, no questions? All right, then I'll let you all go. Enjoy Easter, right? Have a good weekend. I will see you on Monday where we'll pick up with the next reading in our last unit. Thank you, everybody.